7.RP.3 percent word problems. This video is meant to sort of accompany the lesson we started in class. I wanted to finish off the idea, and so that you have plenty of time to practice in class tomorrow. Okay, so, well, that doesn't fit very well. Let's try that. There we go. Okay, so a couple things we need to talk about here. Tip, tax, interest, commission, fees. Okay, these are all typically things that we talk about using percentages that are added on top of something. Okay, and then you have something called discount or coupons. Those are things that when you use a percent and you remove it from the total. Okay, so we started talking a little about the part to whole relationship, right? Understanding which is the whole thing, which is the part. So tip, tax, interest, commission, fees, these will be a part that we're going to add onto something. And then if you have a discount or a coupon, this is something we're going to subtract away. Okay. All right, let's move through. Let's see, we did that one in class. Hopefully you've done that one in class also. Let's start with this one. Okay, on a test, you got a 32 out of 40, meaning out of 40 points, you got 32 of them correct. Or maybe there's 40 questions and you got 32 questions correct. We want to know what percent of the problems did you answer correctly. Now, we don't typically do this type of grading in our school currently, but it's something that you hopefully are maybe a little bit familiar with, and if you're not, you definitely will when you get to high school. So why not start now? Okay, so let's see. We have 32 out of 40. So we gotta look to see what do we know here. Do we know the percent? Do we know the part? Do we know the whole? Okay. Now in this case, we don't know the percent. I don't see a percent anywhere in there. Plus, we're trying to figure out what percent. And what we're trying to do is percent is if this thing was out of 100 points or 100 questions, how many would we assume to get correct? So we have to figure out what do we know. We know the part and we know the whole. Okay, so we know the 40 is the whole. Okay, 40 is the whole, right? And we'll call these maybe the points. Okay, and we know if we get 0% of those correct, that it would be 0 points. Okay, so we're working somewhere between 0 and 40. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill out our 10% and our 50%. So what is 10% of 40? Well, that would be 4. Okay, what is 50% of 40? That's 20. And so now I'm looking at my 32. It's going to be somewhere in this range, right? It's going to be somewhere between 50 and 100, right? Well, I know that 10% is 4. So if I want to, I could just continue going by tens, right? I've got this broken up into tens. So I could say 60%, right? 60% is going to be 24. And 70% is going to be another 4, so that'd be 28. And 80% is going to be another one, which is 32. Okay, and if I went to 90%, that would be 36, which hopefully you can see the pattern here, right? It's if we were to write an equation here, right, we'd say it's going up for every 10%, it's going up 4, right? So you can see, so 70%. Right, 7, right? Every 10%, 7, 10% times 4 is 28. So we figured out that 32 points, right? A 32 out of 40, whoops, not 34, 32 out of 40 is equivalent to an 80%, right? So it's equivalent to 80%. Now, what does that look like? Well, this would also be 80 out of 100. Okay, if I were to go from 40 to 100, and then 32 would go to 80, right? If there were 100 questions, you'd assume to get 80 of them correct. Or this is also if I divided, right? If I did 32 divided by 40, I would have gotten 0.8. Okay. All right. You could have also simplified, right? We know 32 out of 40. 32 out of 40, both of these are divisible by 4, so if I divide this by 4 and I divide this by 4, I get 8 out of 10. Well, 8 tenths is the same as this. You can change that to 80 hundredths, which is 80 over 100, which is the same as 80%. Okay, lots and lots of different ways to do this. None of them are necessarily better than another. It's whatever works for you. All right, let's try another one. John has 12 stamps with boats on them. This is 40% of his collection. How many stamps are in his entire collection? Okay, so again, we need to understand what are we looking for here. There's a percent, we're going to do a part, and we have a whole. Okay, so we're looking for how many stamps are in his entire collection, right? So this will be the whole. I know the percent, okay, and what I'm trying to find is, well, I'm trying to find the whole, and I know a part, okay. So 100%, we don't know what that is, okay, so we'll call this stamps. But we do know that 40%, which we would say is right around here, right? 40%. 40% is 12 of those stamps, okay? And we're trying to figure out what 100% is. Well, I don't know at 40, I don't know, I know 40% is 12, so I can't necessarily get to 100. So let's try backing this up, okay? So 40%, how do I go from 40% to 10%? Because if I can get to 10%, then I can just multiply by 10 and get all the way to 100. So 40%, how do I go from 40% to 10%? Well, I could divide by 4, right? 40 divided by 4 is 10. So let's do 12 divided by 4, and this would get me 3. Okay? So I have a couple options here. One is I could just multiply this now times 10, right, which would get me to 30. Another way is I could say, well, this is 10% and this is 3, so I could add the 10% just to get to 50, right? So we'd know that 50%, what's 12 plus 3? That would be 15. So half of his stamps are 15, which means he would have 30 total. Okay. Let's try another one here. Charlotte earns 5% interest per year on her money in the bank. If she started with $3,000 in her bank account, how much interest did she earn in 1 year? Okay, so this is what I want you to do, is I want you to try to figure out what are the different parts of this, right? What is the part? What is the whole? What is the percent? Go ahead. Okay, in this case, we know the part. We're looking for a part, we're looking for a whole, and we're looking see if we know a percent, right? Well, the percent we know is 5%. Okay, and the whole we know is $3,000, and the part is the question. Okay, so what we're looking to do is we're trying to find interest, right, in dollars. Okay. Actually, no, we're not trying to find the interest. The interest, we are trying to find the interest, but the unit we're using is actually going to be dollars for that, okay? All right, so we know that the whole is 3,000, so we can put it here. Okay? Now, we're going to figure out what is 10%. So go ahead and find 10%. All right, so hopefully you found, right? You just drop everything down a place value, so you know that 10% is $300. Okay, well, if you know that 10% is $300, I'm hoping you can figure out what 5% is, right? 5% would just be half of that. So 5%, right, of $300 or $3,000 is going to be $150. That's how much interest she would have. Now, interest is something that would be added onto the bank account, okay, not subtracted. Interest is something that you earn if you are putting money in the bank. It gets a little confusing sometimes, but if you borrow money from the bank, then you have to actually pay interest. Okay, let's move along. All right, Tracy's soccer team scored 80 goals this year. Tracy scored 30% of those goals. How many goals did Tracy score? Okay, again, I'd like you to try to find what is the part, what is the whole, and what is the percent. Okay. All right, in this case, we know that we have the soccer team scored 80, right? And we know that Tracy scored 30%. So we know the whole, which is 80 goals. We know the percent, which is 30%. And what we're looking for is the part, right? The part is Tracy's goals, which would make sense. She can't score more than the team scores. If she's on the team, she can't score more than the whole team. She could score all the goals for the team, but she can't score more than that. Okay, so let's fill it in. We know that the whole is going to be 80. And I should have put it in here. We're talking about goals. Okay, so 80 there. All right, and then let's go ahead and we can do half. Half of that is going to be 40. Okay, we could do 10%. You tell me what's 10%. 10%. Okay, hopefully it's 8, right? So you know it's 8. And we're trying to find 30%. So this is a pretty basic one, right? So we can do 20%, 30%. Okay, so you tell me what's 30% of this. All right, well, 10%, right? 30% is 10%, so this would be 24 goals, okay? So Tracy scored 24 goals. And if you did it, you could say 24 out of 80, okay? And if you simplified this, you actually can see, right? If you divide this by 8 and this by 8, you get 3/10, okay? 3/10 looks like 0.3. If I'd add this, right, I get 30%. Okay. Let's try another one. In a survey, 18 out of 24 people preferred Joe's Burgers over Patty's House of Burgers. What percent of this? Okay, this is very similar to the test or problem, or the schoolwork problem. Why don't you go ahead and you try solving this one? Go. Okay, and this one, we don't know the percent, right? But we know the whole and we know the part. So let's go ahead. Let's see, we're talking about people. Okay, and this would be 0. So if the whole is 24, okay, is that. The part is going to be 2, or 10% is going to be 2.4, which, you know, that's not actually possible. You can have 2.4 people, but it's still going to be helpful for us, okay? Then we know that 50%, right, is half of that, so that's 12, okay? So let's see. We can go, there's a couple different ways we could do this. We could just count by 2.4s. We know that if, let's see, 50% is 12, well, you could do half of that, right? What's half of 50%? Half of 50% is 25%. Okay, so that could do half of this, gets me to 6. Okay, well, if you look, we need 18, right? 18 is going to be somewhere in here. Actually, it's halfway between. Well, if we know that, look, 6 is, right, we can go by 6 here. So 6, 12, 6 plus 12 is 18. And if I do 25% and 50% together, I get 75%. That'd be one way. We could have also written it as a fraction, right? 18 out of 24. Okay, both of these are divisible by 6. So you get 3/4, right? And hopefully you know now that that's 0.75, which is the same as 75%. Okay, meaning if they were to survey 100 people, we would expect 75 of them to prefer Joe's Burgers over Patty House's burgers. Okay, that should be enough for now. Go ahead and make sure you bring notes with you to class. You definitely will need to use them on the activity we have planned. Okay,